looking at consumer trends and category opportunities. It's an increasingly important part of our business, which means it must be an increasingly important part of the wine industry, i.e. our clients. What we do is we spend a lot of time being very nosy and investigating, looking at, obsessing about what consumers are doing. And we look around the world through our network of offices at consumer behaviour, what's going on, what's trending, what people are talking about, what's happening outside of wine. That allows us to then identify innovation and opportunities, category opportunities within our category, within the wine category. Because, as we know, wine is not independent of everything else that is going on in our lives and is for consumers' lives, and is merely a part of everything that they are doing. Let's go to, check back up here. If you look back at the history of new product development or innovation, one of the things that we know is that the speed of innovation has increased significantly in the last 20 years. So when you look back at Coca-Cola, where this image comes from, or Pepsi, when they started, a new product or an innovation maybe took 10 years, maybe took 15 years. If you fast forward to where we are now, the pace and change of innovation in the categories, not necessarily ours, but looking at other categories, has increased exponentially. So what does that mean? That our consumers in wine are expecting new product development and innovation because they get it from other places. And craft beer, we were talking earlier actually about craft beer in the US, and in fact it's been referred to on the panel, I think, in other markets. Why? One of the reasons is the speed of which the new products are being delivered to market, and that consumers can try, experience and see something which they feel is new. A great category also to look at when it comes to the increasing speed of innovation is the confectionery category. I particularly enjoy spending time studying the confectionery category. So it's always a great one to look at. And if you think of your familiar confectionery chocolate brands that you're aware of, and this is a really good one to do when you're in an airport, because there'll be the Toblerone and there'll be the Kit Kat and the various brands that you see. Have a look at what products they've got out, and I guarantee you there will be a new product or an innovation that you probably haven't seen before, and that you notice when you walk through the duty-free chocolate section in the airport. Because there's this idea, this continuous development, and where we're standing in our category in wine is we're quite a long way back from that. The idea of new or innovation is quite a long way behind in terms of speed of innovation and development. This picture, just to, from a trend perspective, actually fits in with the notion of feel-good. It's from the Philippines, and the billboard is actually, those are plants around it that absorb carbon dioxide. And they're planted in recycled Coca-Cola bottles. So it fits so many notions of this idea of trends and innovation. So given that platform, that from a consumer point of view they are expecting new and expecting it quickly, what type of new is going to appeal to consumers? For many consumers, we're of course all consumers too, a sense that the world as it should be. We have a sense of looking back, of feeling good, of being retrospective in terms of retro. And retro is particularly important to us in times of economic, social, political or technological change or turmoil. So we tend as people to focus on the past when the present seems a little uncertain, and we've certainly globally seen a lot of uncertainty over the last couple of years. So with retro, this is a huge trend. We see it in every of the 24 markets that we work in. It's massive in the US, I was just talking about the US, and consistent in Australia, we see it in China, we see it in all sorts of places. So how does retro play out? Well, the first picture up here actually is taken, you may not assume, well, I think, have a think about where you think that shop, that store may be. Maybe some quaint little village in England or some European city. It's actually in Las Vegas. And it's a store that is branded as buy something from the home of your grandmother. So this sense of nostalgia and looking back. And the whole store is filled with nostalgic style of products. The next picture round, the retro tees, the retro t-shirts, was a competition that was run for new artists in Australia. And this is actually taken from the subway station, one of the subway stations in Sydney. And they had a competition to the soft drinks manufacturer, had a competition to design retro style t-shirts, which then got printed from new artists. This one is a store in San Francisco, a gentleman's man's store, which only sells gentleman's retro products, but to the millennial, the newer, younger man. And then this final one is an example, again from Australia, of a Serbian conserved jam product that's all about the essence of the generations before that had come to make it. So very clear examples, and I'm sure if you think of recent experiences you've had in this country and in many countries, you'll be very familiar with this notion of retro and retro storytelling and retro styling. So how does it play out in wine, or how can we build on the retro in terms of innovation? It sounds a bit of a contradiction, doesn't it, to say retro looking back, innovation looking forward. Well, this is the Wiston or Wiston, it's actually in English, I put it up there, a South Downs sparkling wine. And you can see in the styling there, the retro of the label. There are two labels here from Australia. This is Ladies Who Shoot Them, and Blue Boys. And you can see very clearly the retro styling. Retro often is also about a gentle sense of humour. It's a smile, it's something about putting a smile on people's faces, having that, something that consumers can connect with in a gentle, smiling way. And then this is Lovers Not Toreadors, so bullfighters, which is a brand that's just been launched by Woolworths, so one of the big two retailers in Australia. Fully retro, slight sense of humour, brings a smile to the face, and absolutely playing on this notion of retro from a wine perspective. So they're innovating all of these brands through looking back as opposed to through looking forward. Feel good is another trend that's very important to us, and this is about looking after our conscience, well-being and health, as well as projecting that to look after other people. So some examples of how feel good is a trend. This comes from a supermarket in Brazil where you pay full price for, in this case, a pizza, but you only get half of one. And the money that you pay for the other half of the pizza, the retailer donate to local food charities. So you buy half of it gets effectively donated. The next one round is from Ray, one of my colleagues who's here from our China office, and these are cans of oxygen that are sold in China, particularly with the recent pollution problems that have been had there, and there are many apps and other products that are specifically in China about feel good, looking after your health. I'm sure we're all familiar with examples of the next one, which comes from San Francisco, which is this fast food with a difference. So it's about local farmers, about sustainable pricing relationships, it's about sustainable packaging for fast food. So lots of different notions of feel good. So the consumers feel good about buying and shopping there because they're doing the right thing and also looking after their own health. And this final one again is from San Francisco, and this is a mini vegetable and herb public garden in amongst the skyscrapers of San Francisco and central downtown. So really different ways that we see feel good, and how does that come through to wine? Two examples. One on the left is Rootstock in Sydney, which is a natural, organic and small producer wine festival that's also linked into arts, music, culture and food. So everything combined, holistic, very millennial. I was just talking about millennials in the US, really fits in with them. So the consumers there feel good about the businesses, the companies that they're dealing with. The one on the right-hand side is actually taken in Italy, which is a kind of Italian food concept. I can't think of a better way to describe it. In many, now quite a few major cities in the US, where you purchase food and wine to take away, or they have a number of restaurants on site, so they're quite big square footage. And this is the Vino Libero. So these are wines that they specifically advertise, this is the sign above them, that are wines with less additives. So they're positioning the Italian wines as a range that they have of wines with less additives. So two ways in which wine events are innovating to touch on the feel-good. Now there's a really interesting one about feel-good, which is alcohol levels, particularly given we work in a category of alcohol. And that kind of goes both ways. In some senses, we see this notion of actually more moderate and lower alcohol can be appropriate, and in other ways, we hear consumers often talk to us about, if you're going to take the alcohol out, what's the point? I might as well have a soft drink. So we see both sides of the story on that one, and we're not quite sure yet entirely which way that's going to go. We'll probably continue to have both of those. As consumers also, we're quite conscious and subconscious in our subconscious about how we fit into the world. So there are two trends here on which we see that are platforms for innovation. One of which is Selfie, I'm going to talk about that in a second, the other of which is tribal. These may appear to be contradictory or opposite to each other, and in some ways they are, but they're still important parts of who we are. Selfie, I think we're all familiar with Obama and the Danish Prime Minister taking a selfie at Mandela's funeral, and the Pope taking selfies with a couple of his lovely congregation, and there are numerous the selfie taken even at the Oscars in January by the host, and was tweeted, I want to say something like, so I was in the States when that happened, something like 16 million retweets within the first 12 hours. Maybe I'm making those numbers up, but some ridiculous amount of retweeting of the selfie that Ellen took of Angelina and Brad and various other people in the audience during the Oscars. So we know what selfie is. As a trend, it's a little bit more than just taking a picture of yourself. It's this idea that we like to express our individuality and remain individual to those around us. So some examples of this. These are personalised M&Ms, and you'll see from the various branding around the room that they're in the Wine Intelligence corporate colours, and they say Wine Intel, and they've got pictures of wine glasses and things like that. Personalised M&Ms, where you can choose the colours, you can have images, words printed onto them, so they become the M&Ms just for you, and they were the M&Ms just for Wine Intelligence. The next one round's actually in Melbourne, where an ice cream brand store asked its customers to design flavours of ice cream, and actually that lady is the cousin of one of our colleagues in Australia, and she was one of the 5 finalists with her flavour, and that's who she is. So this notion of actually being personal and being able to develop something. The next one round's actually from a hotel in Canada a couple of weeks ago, and you might not be able to quite read the handwriting, but on some cookies they'd left for me in my room, they'd handwritten, "Dear Mrs. Halstead, welcome to the hotel, and we're really pleased to have you here." So this idea that they were connecting and cared about me. And then finally, this one that's trending at the moment, which is, I've in fact had an invite on it, which I need to do something about. Take a selfie for girls, which is how it started, with no makeup on, and donate £3, $5, €5, whatever currency you're in, to cancer research. So this idea of kind of going naked, taking the makeup off. So that's been trending, and you take a picture, a selfie, you donate £3, and then you send it to 3 people. And it's kind of gone viral and huge. It's now switched over to the guys, who are now taking pictures with makeup on, and then sending it to 3 people and making the donation. So the idea of selfie is coming through in many ways in our lives. Technology is allowing us, ironically, to be much more personal rather than group. How does it come through in wine? Lots of different examples. Wine Business Monthly, the Australian trade magazine, are doing a vintage selfie competition at the moment, where you send in your selfies for the wine industry. Excuse me. This is the Penfolds ampule, I'm sure we're all familiar with it. That's personalisation on another level, in terms of, I think, somebody maybe here from Treasury, I think they made 12 of the ampules, 10, 12, something, yeah? The personalisation, kind of to the extreme. This one's actually in Buenos Aires, where you can have personalised wine, so this is not US dollars. And then these ones are just the sense that you can kind of personalise how you feel. So the wine labels are rough day, breakdown, murder on my mind. So you can personalise it a little bit to how you're feeling or that day, and express yourself. Tribal is sort of the opposite of selfie, but sort of coexists alongside it. We are tribal animals, as I said earlier, that doesn't go away. So we have a sense of belonging derived from being part of a group or groups. The top image is actually in London, which was a kind of canal boat festival party that was publicised and trended. The sense that everybody to one of the canals in London brings down in inflatable boats and comes together and has a party on the canal. In fact, it went so mad and so many people turned up that the police had to get rid of everybody because it was completely dangerous and there were far too many people there. The next one round is from Las Vegas again, and this is a sort of more philanthropic idea of tribal. You might be able to just see from the image, but it's a load of post-its, and it's a community board in a community-funded and operated coffee shop where money is raised through various philanthropic organisations in Las Vegas, where clearly there's a lot of wealth. And then the community votes via these post-its on what to do with the money. So in one case, they've established a coffee shop, and that's what they're doing. The notion that they have a say and that the tribe will decide how the community funding for those who are not so privileged in Las Vegas are going to be looked after. And then the final example is actually from London, and this is a great one. It's a commuter book club. So they advertise the book from the book club on the billboards on the London Underground, so you can buy or download the book, and then you tweet comments about the book. So anybody that's part of the book club, the tribe, can then see other people's comments, and it becomes a sort of a virtual book club that anybody can join in with. So different examples, and how does tribal come through to wine? Lots of different ways that just 2 examples. This one is from Adelaide, the Adelaide Food and Wine Festival. Part of the festival is crowdfunding to enable the festival to happen. So it's a real sense of tribal. I'm giving money to make this happen, to enable local wine producers and food producers to host this, and then I'll get a ticket or something back in return for the level of funding that I put in as a consumer. And the other one's actually Australian as well, and it's a sort of online wine community that sells wine, so it is actually a wine retailer, but the essence of it is we're a community, particularly targeted at younger millennial consumers, to help you navigate wine. So there'll be lots more going on, and part of it happens to be a commercial transaction opportunity, but it's much more about being part of that wine community, wine and food community, as it is in that sense. We also desperately try to make sense of the world around us. It's very complicated, it's very confusing. So how do we do that, and what can we do from an innovation perspective? Well, there are two trends, core trends going on in this space: visualization and transparency. So let's have a look at those. Visualization is increasingly important. It's about simplifying and summarizing and creating instant visual impact. If you think of the number of pieces of information that we all receive every day, whether it's via our phones, which I don't have, computers, on messages that we get from the television if we're watching it, from billboards, from newspapers, you name it, the number of pieces, particularly now we have the whole online world. How do we digest so much information that is fired at all of us? And one of the ways to decode and do that is through clear visuals. I don't know whether you've noticed, actually, going back very old-fashioned, print newspapers, the good old days, how many of them are now using infographics to communicate something that previously might have been communicated via words. You'll also see that on websites or e-alerts, rather than a kind of set of text to whoever it is giving you information. They might now deliver it in one clear or more simple infographic. This is actually, again, back to Las Vegas, these last two examples. You see where my team's been recently, and we've been taking pictures everywhere. That's actually a museum, and you can't quite see, but the wallpaper or the background is dollars. There's dollar bills, and it's a part of a mafia exhibition in this museum. And so they're using this really visual cue of dollar bills as part of the exhibit to enable to communicate about money laundering, basically, and what had happened previously in money laundering in the US. And then a completely different one, the M&M store. I mean, from the sublime to the ridiculous, the M&M store, clearly they're very colourful anyway as a product, but using massive visuals to entice and to communicate with consumers in their store. Some fantastic examples of how visual is being used in wine. The I Heart brand started in the UK. Now I'm looking at, Richard isn't even looking at me, so I'm going to ask him a question in a minute. In other markets. What's interesting about the I Heart brand, so this one, is that it's easily interchangeable. So they, for the Jubilee, which we had in the UK, the Queen's Jubilee, they have a, one with a Union Jack flag capsule on the top and very British looking. And then they have, I Heart Moscato, I Heart Rosé. You can imagine how long, how many opportunities there are to develop what they're doing with a really strong brand. It's simple, it's very visual, and connecting really successfully with consumers. Back to kind of basics in terms of other wine that's available, and I'm trying to remember where this picture was, whether it was taken in South Africa or the US, and I apologise, I can't remember. I'll make sure that that goes on the one that we send around afterwards. But this idea of, in a very complicated world of communicating very visually in terms of wine. Transparency is the other one. We want, as consumers, we are more interested in, I should say, traceable honesty to reassure our sense of responsibility. This links back to feel good, but we are becoming more conscious of the businesses that we're transacting with. So why is this important in innovation? Because in terms of telling the truth, being honest, being truthful in the products and in the innovations that are developed. And people find out pretty quickly these days if there is dishonesty within an organisation. So the idea of transparency here, this one was taken, I don't know, is an example from Cape Town of different olive oils, but being very transparent about what they're for and where they're from. So there's different qualities of olive oil. Some are good for cooking, some are good for making salads, some are very specialist and should be used, you know, and with care. But being very traceable and transparent in terms of the olive oil, sorry. The next one round is actually from Slovenia, and here the milk producers, so the dairy farmers, were being pushed down consistently by the supermarkets. So they set up vending machines where you could take your container and fill it up directly with milk from the machine. You knew it was fresh, you knew where it was from, you knew it was traceable, and you knew you were paying a fair price to the producers of it. This one is from New York City. It's a coffee bar where they're promoting locally sourced, so that's not just, you know, the state, but New York City and Brooklyn. So down to that level, we're focusing on products that are made that close to where we are. And the last one actually is San Francisco again, is a milk bar, which is very similar to the, not a vending machine, but a retail outlet, where they're serving and selling locally sourced milk. Clearly milk, you know, as we know, is more in crisis, or is in crisis in terms of pricing and being driven down. So same phenomena happening in Slovenia and in the US in terms of milk pricing and being exposed in different ways. So how does this come through into wine? Two examples of development or focus in terms of how this comes to wine. The first one from South Africa, who are pioneering in terms of traceable, transparent business models from a wine point of view. And then I think I referred to earlier the notion of natural wines with no added sulfide. So again, consumers becoming, maybe it's the trade that's leading this one at the moment, but maybe consumers will follow more, although there are, that's actually from a natural wine fair. And I showed a picture, I think earlier, of a wine bar in the US in the previous presentation, which only sells natural wines. So we are seeing pockets of evidence for this. And then the final set of trends, the world as it is. So this is what we observe: being there, blended, and obsessive. Being there, I've talked a lot about being there, both in this presentation, experiential, and the previous one, is here to stay. This sense of, I don't just want a product, I want an experience. Now that's difficult, obviously, if we're brand owners and we own product. And you know, some people may be able to visit our fabulous wineries that we have, but it's not going to be all our consumers from all around the world. But how can you create sense of being there in other markets where you're selling, with retailers, with on-premise? It doesn't just have to be back at your winery. So some very different examples of being there. The first one is started in the UK. This is actually taken in Sydney, and these are kind of private underground concerts and art exhibitions which happen in people's backyards, in their gardens. So this was my colleague taking a picture in Sydney. We've just got a sign just come on and saying, the technical guy, if somebody wouldn't mind, oh, it's disappeared now. Taken in somebody's garden where they hosted this, and you apply for secret tickets for, you can imagine, it's so cool and trendy. Clearly I would never be there, but my colleagues were. The sense of how do you create experiences around stuff, because it's really important. The next one, back to Las Vegas. It was a cigarette machine that's now being filled with little pieces of art from local artists in Las Vegas. So when you're there, you can take home some, you know, original art. You have something about being there. Eventbrite, which is 16 million events coming through Eventbrite in terms of experiences. And then back to Las Vegas, part of the philanthropic organisation I was talking about earlier, they've created a container park where they've recycled containers into small kind of retail outlets and artist studios, you know, shipping, we're all familiar with them, shipping containers. And every evening at sunset, they get out these big drums and encourage people to learn to drum, and the visitors to experience, to be part of this whole container park. And in fact, they have giant grasshoppers, clearly, because it's Las Vegas, giant grasshoppers that dance around, sort of puppet grasshoppers. So the whole sense that there's this kind of experience that you're going to talk about, that you're going to share, and that you're going to have. So a really important part of our lives. Different ways it's happening. London gets its first winery. So, you know, talk about, you know, not England and London, not necessarily with the strongest reputation for winemaking, although clearly we have some great wines as well. But it's not, you know, it's not our home ground. But bringing the winery into London, and in fact, I was talking to a group of consumers in Chicago last week, and there's a similar operation in Chicago, where there is the kind of winery is brought into town, and then there's a kind of restaurant, and you know, and obviously all the wine isn't made there, like it won't be here, but it's that sense of I'm experiencing something. Masses of cellar-door wine festivals, Pinot festivals, Taste of Tasmania, they're all Australian examples. It's all about consumers having an experience rather than just buying a product, and how to create those. And this final one from Stellenbosch is a cooking school in a winery. So you're taking home more of a memory than just the wine itself. It's very experiential. Blended, what do I mean by this? I don't literally mean blended wine. It kind of has a crossover into our terminology in the wine sector. This sense that in our world there is a blurring of traditional, cultural and social boundaries. There's more blended families in terms of people, you know, getting together and marrying, being partners from other countries. You know, it's not as local and domestic as it used to be. There are excuse me, multiple families in terms of remarriage and generation. So really different notion of family in many places. We travel a lot more, so we're more familiar with other cultures, experience them directly. They're coming to us in terms of cuisine that we get. You know, I had a fantastic Japanese meal here in Düsseldorf last night, as I'm sure many people have, and there apparently is a great and very strong Japanese culture or community here in Düsseldorf, which I had the pleasure to sample their food last night. So this is much more important to us. This example at the bottom here is the flower-scented Häagen-Dazs in Japan. So this notion of blending flavours and brands that are culturally or domestically appropriate. I took this picture actually at Heathrow Airport last week on St Patrick's Day. Clearly that's why Guinness had done it. It's their chocolates. So they're dark and light chocolates. They're about that big, each one, made the size to look like pints of Guinness, so the shape of a glass of Guinness, and they're Guinness flavoured chocolates. So talk about blending the notion of many different things going on there. And the top one actually is hairdressers. And what they're doing is they're actually blending the idea of drinks, so what drinks stand for, with the different types of haircuts that you can get. So we see blending in bringing together cultures, ages, generations, different things, blending much more than we've ever seen before. And how does this come through to wine? Well, one example at the top is one of the chain restaurants in the US has just launched wine milkshakes. Not quite convinced that I'm going to be running there desperately, but blending the idea of different through the category. This is again a notion of blending on and off trade, and the fact that there is a much thinner line between retail and on-premise. You know, before we were either in a shop or we were in a restaurant, for example. Now, the two, I was talking about Italy earlier, which is a combination of the two. So the on and off premises is combining much more. And one of my favourite examples of blending in every sense of the word, even down to the wine itself because it's Bordeaux, is Downton Abbey branded. So the English historical TV drama coming from Bordeaux and being sold in China. So 3 levels of blend, well 4 levels of blending if you count the wine itself, in terms of bringing together different notions. And then finally, obsessive. That top one I had to share with you, again from Las Vegas. Obsessive in the terms of the world's highest calorie burger. Now apparently, my colleague who was there was telling me that if you're over a certain weight, you get the food for free. So this notion, obsessive in the other sense of the word, that we obsess in lots of different ways. Obsessive is about celebrating being dedicated, celebrating being fanatical, and celebrating being focused. It's brilliant for us in wine because this is what we are. So it plays beautifully to the notion of wine. This one again is from Italy, the mixed on-off-premise outlet I was talking about, and they have their own brewery for craft beer on site. They're obsessive about making the craft beer and then serving it. And I have to put this picture in at the end because that's actually my kitchen and my sourdough bread. And for Christmas, one of my best friends gave me some sourdough yeast starter, which you need and grow to make sourdough bread. So you keep it in a jar and you feed it flour and water and it keeps growing, and from it you take away bits and you can make sourdough bread. So I'm obsessed with making bread, and then I take pictures of my bread because I'm obsessive about it. And you'll see many more people, I'm not hopefully the only one, is obsessive about kind of crafting or making or different things that we have the ability to do. Some examples in wine, I think Mouton Rothschild in terms of obsessive about its labels and the change and the history behind them. And the other one, which is always one of my favourites, is ice wine in Canada. I mean, you've got to be obsessive about a product if you deliberately go out at the time of day and under the temperatures to pick grapes. I think it's a classic example in our category of the ultimate obsessive behaviour that they can focus on in terms of innovation strategy. So to conclude, we've seen lots of trends, we've seen how they're playing out in wine. Where would I focus? Where would we focus in terms of the innovation pipeline? One, make sure it happens quickly. The normal pace that we do in the wine industry is probably not going to engage consumers, so categories such as craft beer are going to continue to erode into our territory if we're not delivering what consumers want. So, first one, causes. What do you stand for as a brand or a retailer? It has to be genuine, you can't make it up, people will find out, but make sure what you're doing stands for something so consumers can talk about it. We just mentioned this one, multi-channels and sectors. The channels are not separated, they're not as independent of each other, our worlds are much more connected. So think about the multi-channel strategy, not just the single-channel strategy. Retro storytelling, if you recall back to the beginning, we talked about how important retro is, and also the fact that retro has a gentle sense of humour. It's really important, it's visually strong, it's dynamic, but it's also fun. Not silly fun, but just gentle, humorous and amusing. So how are you innovating to make sure that you're playing or building on the retro theme? We talked about community funding. There's also examples of community purchasing. You know, when enough people say they want something, they get it at a certain price. Many more organisations striking up. So what are you doing in terms of funding and purchasing from a community perspective? We've talked about in blended, multi-origin, multi-variety. We see literally the red blend category in the US as a strong growth category. And between categories, so maybe not necessarily the wine milkshake, but the idea and innovation of where can you blend with between categories? Does it just have to stay within still light wine, for example? What's the crossover? Because consumers are looking for that and they're getting it elsewhere. I touched on alcohol levels earlier. I think it's what we call moderate alcohol levels, making sure that part of your portfolio is offering a moderate alcohol level as opposed to some of the higher levels that we have seen. This is part of feel good for consumers, particularly as they're more conscious of alcohol levels. Governments in many places are driving it. ethical production, sustainable production, doesn't necessarily have to mean literally fair trade, but what is happening in your production process. You know, I could have shown you lots of examples, for example, from the fashion industry, in terms of how they're getting called out in terms of the manufacturing processes that are going on, and more people are becoming aware of that. So what's happening in your whole supply chain, right through to when the consumer gets the product, in terms of what are you doing to make sure that you are ethical in terms of how you are approaching business. Visual branding, another key area for innovation. What in your portfolios do you have from a brand producer point of view that is building on this visual branding, so that you have these quick cues, particularly in markets like the US, to engage with consumers. And then finally, the selfie, building on the selfie trend, the notion of individual serves. I was chatting to somebody yesterday, and this comes at both ends of the market. So some of the younger consumers we were talking to in New York last week were talking about how they love the individual serves because they were cheaper, they didn't have to pay so much, they didn't take such a risk, because if they didn't like a little bottle, they didn't have to throw away a load of wine. It fitted in with their lifestyles, much more convenient. So that's at one end, and then at the other end of the market, and I was speaking at a conference in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, there was a lady from one of the biggest private jet companies in the USA, and she was talking about, oh, we don't get enough half bottles or 50 centilitre bottles of really high quality premium wine to be able to serve on our private jets, because you have several passengers on a jet, they don't necessarily all want the same wine, and they certainly don't want a 75 CL. So complete opposite ends of the market, but this sense of individual serve, maybe I should change that to smaller serve or alternative serve sizes. So on that note, I think we're almost bang on time. I know that everybody's really busy. I'll leave that slide up for you. I know that everybody's very busy and got meetings and planes and various things to dash off to. So I'll stay around in case there are any questions. Got Richard and Steph, my colleagues over there. Juan and Ray, if you wave at the back, two more of my colleagues, and Billy is over behind the ProWein there. So there's lots of the wine territory. We've all got these badges on, so you can find any of us. We will send a version of this presentation to everybody that attended, and we'll also upload it to our website within the next 24 hours or so. Thank you very much for your attention and for attending. Thank you.